another app that does playback, that's going to interrupt any export you may have asked the system to start on your behalf. Even if you're in the foreground, if you get a phone call, that's going to interrupt any export you have. Remember that when your app is in the background, you're not going to be able to record or process video from the camera. Now, some things won't be interrupted. For instance, if you're using asynchronous key value loading, that's not going to be interrupted by multitasking switches. Now, I mentioned before that the audio portion of your movie can play in the background. If you have a movie that's actually audio only, then that will play automatically when you switch into the background. Any other movie that contains some video will have to be restarted once your app switches into the background. There's a very good technical note about this, technical note 1668, which is specifically about how to play audio in the background with MP Movie Player Controller. Now let's talk about advanced playback. This means we're talking about AV Foundation. Remember, AV Foundation is a lower level framework. In AV Foundation, your movie is represented by an AV asset. So rather than the case with Media Player, where presentation state and everything was wrapped up with a single object, we now have an object that's just there to represent our movie. Because movies consist of a number of tracks, there's also an AV asset track object for each particular track inside the movie. When we want to play back a movie using AV Foundation, we're going to use AV Player. With the AV Player, we of course start with an AV asset, which has AV asset tracks. But these don't have any of the presentation state. So we have another object, the AV Player item and AV Player item tracks, which control the presentation state for the movie. This means that if I want to show the movie in two different ways, I would have two different player items, one for each way I'm presenting the movie. Now, the AV Player item is what I give to the AV Player object, which is the object that controls the entire playback. That's the object that you'll be telling to play. But once I've given the AV Player item to AV Player, it's still not on my screen. I need to have an AV Player layer, which is a kind of core animation layer, which is where AV Player is actually going to display the movie. But I'm still not done, because in order for the user to see that movie, it has to be inside my view hierarchy. Now, if you look at any of our sample code around AV Foundation, you'll see that we typically make AV Player layer the layer object for a subclass of UI view. So there's some important considerations when you're using AV Foundation. The first one is if you're using HTTP live streaming, you can't create an AV asset directly from an HTTP live stream URL. You need to create an AV Player item from that URL, and then you can extract the asset from that. If you're familiar with core animation, don't try to use render in context with an AV Player layer. It's not going to work. And AV Player can only have one layer associated with it. Yes, you can have your layer tree there, but remember that only one of those layers is actually associated with the AV Player layer. So to summarize playback, I've talked about two simple classes, MP Movie Player View Controller and MP Movie Player Controller, and I've mentioned a few of the classes in AV Foundation: AV Player, AV Player Layer, AV Player Item, and AV Player Item Track. Now let's talk about recording. So the Media Player Framework doesn't have anything to do with recording. Instead, UIKit hosts the classes that are associated with recording. And of course, AV Foundation has a number of classes around recording. So when we're recording from our iOS device, say an iPhone, we of course have a camera and a microphone. And remember, because you have a microphone, you need to pay attention to your audio session category and make sure you're setting that correctly. Now, you can record video with audio on iOS devices since 3.0. And remember that the recording is under user control. You give the user control and you wait for the user to give you back the result. So the basic way to record video is with UI Image Picker Controller. And what you're going to do is you're going to allocate your UI Image Picker Controller object. And you're going to tell it that your source type is a camera. If you look at the slide, you'll see that we are specifying the media types. We give it an array, but in this case just a single item in that array, which tells the system that we just want a movie. You can tell it that you want both either a movie or a still image. We indicate that we want to allow editing, and we tell the system what our delegate class is. At that point, all we have to do is tell our controller to present this view modally. There's two methods that will be called. Image Picker Controller did finish picking media with info. This is what's called when the user's actually giving you back a movie as opposed to canceling. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to look in that info dictionary for the media type and make sure that they've given you back what you're expecting. If you have been given a movie, you're then going to look in the info dictionary for the URL that's associated with that movie and do whatever it is you want to do with the movie. Once you've done that, you dismiss the modal view that was there and release the picker. Now, if the user cancels, your method Image Picker Controller did cancel is going to be called. In this case, all you need to do is dismiss the modal view controller and release the picker. Now, AV Foundation has a number of classes associated with recording. AV Capture Session, AV Capture Device, AV Capture Input, AV Capture Output, and AV Capture Connection. Let's look at a picture that'll give us a better idea of what's going on here. So I have my iPhone, and I want to capture some video. I'm going to want to see that on my display as I'm capturing it. And I may want to capture some still images. I may want to look at the frames as they go by. I may want to save the frames out to a movie file. But I'm also going to have some audio. And I might want to either save that audio by itself or save it as part of my movie file. Now, the class that ties everything together is AV Capture Session. AV Capture Session controls the entire recording and organizes all the other classes. The input devices, my camera and my microphone, are going to have AV Capture Input subclasses associated with them. The view that I'm getting on my screen is going to have an AV Capture Video Preview layer associated with it. This is another core animation layer. And the various kinds of outputs will all be subclasses of AV Capture Output. The important considerations with recording in AV Foundation are you can only use one of AV Capture Movie File Output and AV Capture Video Data Output at the same time. The system isn't capable of handing you the video frames in real time and writing them out to movie at the same time. The other point is the documentation currently states that AV Capture Video Data Output can support compressed data. This is not the case in iOS 4.3. It's still only uncompressed data. Okay, to summarize the classes I've talked about for recording, UI Image Picker Controller is your main class for basic recording. And of course, you have a delegate associated with that, your UI Image Picker Controller delegate. Now, there are several classes in AV Foundation. I mentioned just a few of them: AV Capture Session, AV Capture Device, AV Capture Input, AV Capture Output, and AV Capture Connection. Now let's talk about editing. So again, with editing, the classes are in UIKit and in AV Foundation. For basic editing, what we're really only doing is trimming the movie. That is, we're trimming portions from either the beginning or end of the movie. What this does is it allows the user to trim those frames. Your program isn't making any decision about where that cut happens. Now, the same class also allows you to re-encode your video at another quality level. You need to look for UI Image Picker Controller quality type. That's how you control that. The two classes here are UI Video Editor Controller and the UI Video Editor Controller Delegate. I'm not going to talk about the interface here in detail because it's very, very similar to the UI Image Picker Controller. Now, you can also do editing as part of your UI Image Picker Controller. there's a property on a UI Image Picker controller, allows editing. Set that to true, and the user will be able to do trims. The interface is very simple for the user. A couple of controls that allow them to move where the beginning trim and end trim is, and a button to either accept or cancel. Now, AV Foundation has quite a few classes used for editing. I'm going to mention each of these very briefly. So if I want to generate still images from my movie, I'm going to use AV Asset Image Generator. If I want to re-encode my movie or export a version in a different aspect ratio or something, I'm going to use AV Asset Export Session. If I simply want to read frames from an existing movie file, I'll use AV Asset Reader. If I want to create a new movie file, I'll use AV Asset Writer. Now, while I'm outputting my movie, if I want to change the sound levels, I'm going to use AV Audio Mix. If I wanted to do straight cuts in my movie, no transitions or fades or wipes, then I'm going to use AV Composition. It allows me to do simple cuts-only editing. I'll use AV Video Composition if I do want to have some sort of transition, a fade or a wipe. Now, I can also include core animations in with my movie in AV Foundation. Core animation can be used to generate titles or other images. And when I do that, I need to use another core animation subclass, AV Synchronize Layer. And further, when I'm exporting a movie that's used core animation, I need to use the AV Video Composition Core Animation tool. The important consideration when editing with AV Foundation is that AV Asset Reader is not a real-time class. Don't expect to be able to read frames from a movie and deliver them to the user in real time using this class. The other consideration is AV Composition and AV Video Composition are meant for two very different sorts of situations. AV Composition is when you're doing simple cuts-only editing. AV Video Composition is when you want to make some sort of transition. Okay, now I'd like to wrap up. If you want more depth on AV Foundation, you should listen to the talks that we gave at WWDC 2010. They're excellent talks on AV Foundation and specifically on recording and editing. So there you have it. I'm Eric Version, and my email address is eversion@apple.com. I look forward to seeing your app really taking advantage of video in iOS.